Hello everyone, welcome back to Coding with Mock, and in this video we'll be having a quick look at the gitignore file. Now, what is the gitignore file? Well, it's simply what it says on the box. It's a file that defines what Git can ignore in your project. Now, when you're working on a project, you'll most probably be working within an IDE, be it Eclipse, be it BlueJ, IntelliJ, whatever. But those files or those IDEs will store specific settings for your project, and especially settings for your IDE within your project folder. Now, you don't want to be sharing those files with your colleagues because they might be using another IDE, or they might be using the same IDE but with different settings. And you don't want to be messing with those settings, because then your colleagues will start getting a bit angry with you. Trust me. Now, the other side of, or another example of things that you don't want to share with your colleagues, and this is more of an efficiency thing, is the build files. Now, if you have you're working on a project and you're writing source code, now if you run your code, your IDE will create build files, and usually they'll be built within the project folder or the project directory. So, and if you want to be sharing your files efficiently, you don't want to be sharing things twice, because you have your source code and you have your build code. Now, in essence, those two are the same, because if you have the source code, you can build the build files, right? So you don't necessarily need to share those files. Now, how can we, within Git, safely and easily tell Git, well, you can just ignore these files? That's quite simple. To accomplish this, we need the gitignore file. Now, how do we create the gitignore file? I'm going to do it in Notepad. You can do it in your IDE or from your command line. But I'm just going to create it using Notepad. And the name of the file, it needs to be in the same directory as your .git repository or .git directory is located. So in my case, within my temp folder, so that's my project folder, and if I do a dir/ah, you'll see that this is where my git or .git folder is located. This is where I need to create my .gitignore file. And it needs to be named as exactly like this: .gitignore, all small characters. If you don't, trust me, Git will not recognize it as the gitignore file. There. Okay, now my Notepad is asking me, do you want to create because it doesn't do you want to create the file because it doesn't exist yet? I want to create the file. Okay, and now in this file I can start describing to Git which files it can safely ignore. Okay, now let's create some files that I want Git to ignore. Let's say that I have a target folder. Target. Okay, so now I have a target folder. Target, for the people that haven't seen Maven yet, this is where your build files will end up in. So if you're not familiar with Maven yet, this is the same as your out folder. So usually you'll have an src folder where you might find or will find your source code, and you'll have an out folder where you have your compiled classes, right? Once you start working with Maven, it'll be called target, okay? And anyway, I'll create the out folder as well, just to make it clear that doesn't really matter to Git which way or what the folder is called. You can have both even. Okay, so I have a target folder, I have an out folder, and let's create another file, file to ignore.txt. right? Please ignore this. There we go. So I have now 2 files, and let's make a few copies as well, because empty directories are ignored by default. So let's create this file. I'm gonna give it another name in a minute. No. I want to replace. No, I want to make. Oh, God damn it. Paste. Oh, I can't have a copy of both, I guess. There we go. Okay, so let's call this build class. Build. This is a class file. Yes. This is my main.class. It's not really important, but just want to show you, and 2 files is fine. And just copy these over to my target folder. There we go. So now I have a file here that I want to ignore, and I have files in here and a file in here. Okay. So you can go away. Okay, now if I run a git status now, you'll see that I have my gitignore file, and that one is new, so it's untracked at the moment. I have a file to ignore, also untracked. I have an out directory with 2 files inside of it. It's not showing the files independently, but it's saying, well, I have a directory here, and it has something in it that needs to be added, and I have a target folder with the same files. Now let's say I want to ignore my file to ignore.txt. Okay, now the only thing I need to do, and this is the really simple part, is I'll just say file to ignore.txt, save, right? So what I'm telling Git now is you can ignore this file. Okay, so if I do a git status now, my file to ignore doesn't show up here anymore because I told Git it's safe to ignore this file. Now I can do the same with, or I could do the same with my files within out. So I could just take a quick look what's inside my out directory. So I have build.class and main.class. Okay, so I could just say, okay, my out folder, and I want build.class to be ignored, and also out/main.class. You can ignore those as well. Okay, now if I do a git status, you'll see it'll still pick up my out folder, but if I would add my out folder, it would ignore these 2 files. Now there's an easier way, because I know that in my out folder or in my target folder, I know that these will contain my eventual build files or my classes that have been compiled, and I just want to ignore the whole folder. That's also an option. What you can do then is just add your complete folder just by naming the folder, and now it should. I made a little mistake. Apparently you need to do it that way, and there you go, right? So yeah, use a /, not a backslash, and then it will ignore the whole folder. Okay, let's add the target folder. There we go. And now the only thing that is left is my .gitignore file. Now you could add your .gitignore file here as well. Ignore the .gitignore. And there you go. Now you're fine. Now, commonly this is not done. Commonly, you would add your gitignore file to the repository and then share that with your colleagues. Okay, because in most cases there will be a lot of similarity between the things that can be ignored on most computers. So usually you wouldn't add the gitignore file itself, and you would just add that file to your repository and share it with everybody. Now, maybe my colleague is using IntelliJ, then you would be adding the idea slash folder, because this is the folder where IntelliJ will keep its project settings, right? So that's something I would not like to share with my colleagues, because there's also the way in which my windows or the frames within IntelliJ are organized, and that's something really personal. So I would not want to share that with my colleagues. I think the Eclipse version of that is .settings. So you would like to add this as well. Okay. Now, that being said, I'm going to give you a really nice website that you can also use. It's called gitignore.io. And on this website, you can basically generate your gitignore file. And it has the most common used settings for a lot of IDEs and operating systems. So let's, for instance, say I'm using Eclipse, and I'm working on Windows. There you go. Now I'm going to ask it to create an example file. So basically it's going to give you some Eclipse settings or files that are commonly used within Eclipse that can be safely ignored. They usually have to do with your Eclipse settings or build files. So you also have the bin directory that will get ignored. Now, this is not going to be a complete file, but it's going to be a starting point, and then you can build from here. So you don't have to manually input all of these files by hand every time. You can just generate this, copy and paste this into your gitignore file, or download this, whatever you want to do. It's a really nice website to use. So that's gitignore.io. I'll put the link down in the description as well. Okay, well, that's it for the gitignore file. I'll see you in the next video.